Hey everybody, it's Izzy here again. I'm diving into another word. I'm diving into the word he. And the word he is a very interesting word for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it is a gendered word, which means that it is clearly a masculine sounding word. When we say he, most people think we mean a man, a male. But it's interesting. I'm going to dive into it as a subword. I'm going to describe a few things about it. I'm not going to talk about the hieroglyphic meaning yet. But I am going to talk about it as a way to think about how subwords work. And so, for example, going back to the gendered part for a second, it's interesting that he is a subword in the word she. So you can see you can add an S at the beginning, and you have now a feminine gendered word, it sounds like. But it still uses the same subword he. And same thing in the word her. I just want to point out that these are different ways that you can use the subword by adding another letter onto it. It now has a kind of a whole new meaning, changes the meaning significantly sometimes. Okay, so all of these are uses of the word he. And now I want to show it again as a subword, for example, in the word them. And so you can see here's the he right in the middle of it. You can see if we understood this T and this M better, we might have a better understanding of what's happening with this he, and it might give us more information about what the word means. But I'm really just trying to point out that it's still the same subword, even though it's inside of these other letters. Again, it's he. Now this is, I think, really interesting, putting the letters inside of the subword. So for example, I think that these subwords have a property where they can kind of stretch and they can expand, sort of like a spring. And so, for example, in the word hire, you have IR inside of the same subword. And I just want to point out that it is still the same subword. So we still have he. It's still intact. It's actually expanded, and now it has two more letters inside of it, but it's still the same subword. Now, here is an interesting word, the word here, because it is interesting to notice that we have the subword twice. We have he at the beginning, but then if you look at this E at the end and use the same H again, you can make the same subword a second time. And so I think this is really interesting because it seems to be a property of these subwords that they can be stretched and expanded in different ways. For example, in this case, it actually looks like we're stretching the word out and adding an R into it. But another way to think about it, which is interesting, is that we actually have the word he here, and it looks almost like the letter E is being expanded. And you can see the letter E here is being expanded and an R is being injected into it, which I think is really interesting. Another use of the subword he. Still the same subword he. Now here's the word there. Again, I just want to point out it's the same pattern with the same he and he as in there, as in here, but now we're just adding a T at the beginning of it. And here's the fun word, whore. We're not going to go into the meaning of it exactly, but you can see here that there's the same subword again, he. And that he subword has captured another word inside of it, or. And we all know or is another subword because we use it as a word in our common language, but in this case, it's a subword of this word. Now, also, you might have noticed by now that there's another subword showed up here. If you look at the outer letters, what word is that? It's the word we. And so I'm going to take a second to dive into the word we, because now you can see that there's a couple really interesting patterns starting to develop. So let's look at the word we for a second, just to reinforce some of this meaning. It's similar to the word he, except instead of an H, obviously we're using a W. But going back to this whore word, it's interesting that the HE and the WE are using the same E. And this seems to be a property of these subwords, that they can share a letter and the subword is still relevant. Now, if we were to really dive into this word, we would probably find that there are some other structures inside of it that have more obvious meaning. This we and he part have some meaning, but there's other pieces of it that would be more obvious if we were trying to really dissect it. But still, I just want to point out that these are all properties of these subwords, that as a subword, they're allowed to do this. And similar to here, we're going to do were. I think this is were. We're. Same thing. We have we here, and we have we again here. And you could also, like I said, look at it as the E has been stretched out and it's got an R put into it. And I think of that almost like in chemistry, like, if you picture like a, I think it's called the Lewis design, Lewis structure of how a chemical molecule looks. You could imagine this R just kind of being attached onto it. Like if you can picture H2O, it's like we have the H, the two O's. It's kind of similar with the two E's. That's kind of a silly example, but also about these subwords, they can be appended at the beginning, have another set of letters next to them. This is kind of like another subword, but because they're the same letter, it's something a little bit different. But it's just to point out that you can just add more letters or subwords onto a subword to create more words. And again, here, while we have this and this, same thing happening again, capturing this IL in the middle. So that's a little bit about the word we and a little bit more about subwords. I'm going to dive into this in more detail and continue to talk about different subwords and flesh them out, and then eventually get down to the point where we start talking about these individual letters, and that'll be really interesting as well. So stay tuned, please like and subscribe, and leave me a comment if you have a word that you want me to talk about.